Well, let's dive straight into it with my next guest. Joining me now is Fox News contributor Joe Concha. Joe, thanks so much for coming here on the U.S. Report. And first of all, bring us up to speed on some of these latest revelations out of James Comer's investigation. We've seen point after point of data that Hunter met with Russians and Kazakhs and Ukrainians and Chinese. And Joe, too, did this. But apparently they just talked about the weather, so the Democrats are saying, hey, nothing to see here.
I know if my son invited me to go on some business calls with him, granted he's 7 years old, so we're talking lemonade stands, but if I were to do this hypothetically, I know that if I talk to at least 20 business partners overseas with folks in China, in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Romania, Russia, that, yeah, I would talk about sun, clouds, dew points, hurricanes, that sort of thing, and not talk about business whatsoever when we're talking millions upon millions of dollars that were funneled into accounts, shell accounts, by the way, shell corporations that serve no purpose whatsoever except to funnel money. And it came back to $20 million came back to the Biden family, 10 members of them. And we're supposed to believe that Joe Biden, who is vice president of the United States, jumped on 20 phone calls with all these people, including with adversaries like China, and only discussed the weather. This is insulting to anybody that has an IQ above 50 at this point. And the fact that this is the line of defense that we're hearing now, not just from Democrats, but many in the American media, is laughable at this point.
Well, and I mean, I'm just talking about the letter that James Comer released today, and you look at that, and even if no access was sold and nothing was done, there's prima facie crimes in there, such as structuring, i.e., as you say, the shell companies and the doling out of payments in ways that they wouldn't be noticed by authorities. These things, people, have been done on federal charges before in the past, and yet Democrats seem to want to run this line that, oh, look, no, really, the real thing is that, Donald Trump had some mean tweets and he kept the wrong paperwork at Mar-a-Lago.
Precisely. The focus has to go back on Donald Trump and his legal challenges, because if the focus is on Joe Biden, not just with these scandals that we talked about, and again, if this impacted foreign policy, this makes Watergate look like a smash and grab. And it appears that Joe Biden was impacted by all this money coming into the family, if not to himself, if you want to be very generous about this. Because remember, you had a prosecutor named Victor Slokin over in Ukraine that was investigating Burisma, where his son was just hired and getting paid $1 million to work there for services. Again, he has no experience in the energy business whatsoever. What services Hunter Biden provided in these situations, no one has yet to define. And Joe Biden actually went out and bragged that he had this prosecutor that was investigating Burisma fired. That is a compromised vice president right there that allowed money coming into the family to impact foreign policy. And we don't even know what the Chinese are getting right now as far as the millions that they gave Hunter Biden, as far as how Joe Biden is operating as president of the United States as it pertains to that. But yes, the whole thing that, well, there's no evidence of a crime here. Well, of course there is. And the bottom line is that Donald Trump Jr., you brought up Trump before, he met with a Russian lawyer once at Trump Tower in 2015 to discuss about adoption or some other topic like that. And that ran the American news cycle for clearly a month, people saying, oh, my goodness, this is proof of Russia-Trump collusion, when there was none there. Here we have actual bank receipts. We have IRS whistleblowers. We have Devin Archer, Hunter Biden's primary business partner, all saying that Joe Biden interacted with all of these folks, not just on phone calls, but at dinners as well. And I don't know how much clearer it could be that there needs to be an impeachment inquiry opened at this point.
Well, yeah, about the impeachment, we know that there's sort of two schools of thought on that at the moment, but we've also seen James Comer saying he's going to subpoena Joe and Hunter, and I got to say, at this stage, it looks more like it's not Hunter's business, but Joe's. And I said earlier in the program that Hunter comes off as kind of the Fredo Corleone of this whole operation. They're going to subpoena them before the House Oversight Committee. Is there any chance that they would respond positively and actually show up here? What's the game that Comer is playing here, and is he going to get to the bottom of this?
No shot that they show up whatsoever on Capitol Hill. Joe Biden testifying, Joe Biden saying anything outside of a teleprompter is an adventure. And if Hunter Biden were to go up there, then I can only imagine how that would go as well. Yeah, that's the thing here. What is the end game? Like, how ultimately does this play out? I would imagine that the Bidens just try to stonewall. You had Peter Doocy of Fox News yesterday ask the president a direct question about sitting in on all those business meetings per Devin Archer's testimony, and just Biden barks back at him like a jilted teenager that got caught cheating on a high school exam. That's a lousy question, and then just walks away. You can only do that for so long. The good news, I guess, for people who are seeking the truth is that elections have consequences. The Republicans control the House of Representatives here in the United States. Therefore, they can continue to investigate, hold hearings, have more whistleblowers come forward, and eventually this is something that Joe Biden won't be able to hide from. One last point. There is a poll out that came out recently from YouGov and The Economist, and they asked, do you think that Joe Biden is honest and trustworthy? And the numbers were somewhere around 60% at the time that he was elected. It's all the way down to almost 30%. In other words, the whole premise of Joe Biden's candidacy in 2020 was, I will restore honesty and normalcy and transparency back to the White House. And now we're seeing he is none of those things. So for him to point at Donald Trump and say, hey, that guy's bad, you can't trust him, Joe Biden can't make that argument anymore in the eyes of many in the American public and voters out here.
And as the old joke says, that other 30%, well, they're liars too. But I want to ask you about something else here, a really serious story out of the U.S. that I think maybe people in Australia have missed. Emotional testimony from families of the 13 U.S. service members killed during Joe Biden's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. And they have, well, I'm going to just play a little grab here, and you can see what they have to say.
My heart started beating faster, and I started shaking, knowing that their son died from cancer and they were able to be by his side. Also wondering how someone could honestly, be so heartless.
I mean, this is pretty damning stuff, and I think the president's reaction to some of these family members, it's just completely inappropriate and bizarre, don't you think?
It goes back to the character and credibility and integrity of this president, quite frankly, and Joe Biden. He spoke to these Gold Star family members, the 13 that were killed after the Biden administration decided it was a really good idea to leave security around Kabul airport to the Taliban. And of course, that was penetrated easily, perhaps intentionally, and 13 U.S. service members are dead. And when he spoke to these Gold Star families, he said, and this is what's incredible, and it's sickening to hear, where he said, well, I know what you're going through because Jill, and that's, of course, the First Lady Jill Biden, and I had to receive our son Beau back from Iraq in a casket with a flag draped over it. And that did not happen. Beau Biden did serve in Iraq, but he came back home, and then he was diagnosed with cancer, and tragically, he died in his mid-40s. But to say that he was killed in action, that somehow he went through the same thing that these 13 Gold Star families went through when their family members were blown up trying to evacuate these folks, Americans and friends of America, out of Afghanistan, to say, oh, we went through the same thing, we know how you feel. I'm sorry, I'm not going to buy the excuse that Joe Biden's old and senile and he just simply misremembers it. He plays the Beau Biden card, his own son, far too often for his own political purposes. And again, it's just nauseating when you hear him equate what happened with Beau Biden to what these folks had to go through because of this president's actions or non-actions as it pertains to Afghanistan and that chaotic fatal withdrawal.